The rain had just started to fall, soft and steady, as if the heavens were whispering secrets no one could understand. It was the kind of night that felt like it didn't belong to the living. The sky was thick with low, heavy clouds, and the wind carried a strange chill, one that sank not into the skin, but deep into the bones. On nights like these, people in the province would hurry indoors, latch their windows tight, and warn their children not to wander after sundown. Me gumagala esse gubbet, the elders would say. Something roams the forest. But Paul had never been the kind of person anyone listened to, even when he spoke of danger. He was a quiet, humble guy in his late 20s, living in the shadow of poverty since he was a boy. Orphaned young and raised by his grandfather, an old man who claimed he once saw something in the woods that wasn't meant for this world. Paul grew up with stories instead of toys, silence instead of comfort. He worked odd jobs just to keep the lights on in their small kubo at the edge of Barangay-Luentien, near the vast mountains of Sierra Madre. Sometimes he would chop wood, sometimes clean the barangay hall, or guide hikers through narrow trails if he was lucky. He had a steady companion, though, Elmer, his childhood friend, who brought laughter into even the darkest days. They didn't have much, but their bond was like family. Lately, however, something had shifted in the village. Paul had felt it deep in his gut. The animals in the forest had started behaving strangely. Birds flying away in the middle of the night, dogs barking at nothing. And once, Paul even saw a deer sprinting down the hillside, eyes wild with terror. He brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a snake or a wild boar. But then came the screams. It started with a couple of teenagers who camped near the river. They came back pale, shaking, their tent half torn. They swore something huge passed by in the night. It wasn't human, one whispered. It stood like a man, but moved like a beast. The barangay captain told everyone to stay away from the woods after dark. Of course, Paul didn't believe in the tall tales of a swang or copper. He had heard it all his life. But this felt different. One afternoon, Paul found deep claw marks on a tree near his grandfather's old trail, and he knew no ordinary animal could have done that. The grooves were longer than his hand. He tried to record it on his old cell phone, but the video came out blurry, distorted, like static had somehow corrupted the file. It made his skin crawl. Maybe it's just old logging damage, Elmer had said, chuckling as he patted Paul's shoulder. You need to stop watching those YouTube horror stories, bro. But even he didn't laugh when, 2 days later, they found huge footprints by the creek, twice the size of a grown man's. The prints weren't just impressions. They were deep, heavy, as if whatever left them was impossibly massive. Paul tried to ignore it. He focused on chores, on Elmer's jokes, on surviving the daily grind. But at night, the whispers came. Soft, distant. Not voices exactly, but something like deep breathing, echoing faintly through the trees. Sometimes it sounded like groaning, sometimes like a low, guttural growl. He started setting up his old video camera, the one he used for documenting birds and wildlife. He pointed it toward the forest, hoping to capture the noises. What he got instead chilled him to the core. In one frame, only a few seconds long, there was movement behind the trees. A figure, tall, shaggy, hunched. It paused, almost as if it noticed the camera. Then it stepped back into the shadows. Paul couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the clip, zooming in, trying to convince himself it was just a trick of light. But deep down, he knew there was something out there. And then came the final straw. One early morning, Paul heard loud knocking on his door. When he opened it, he saw his neighbor, Mang Birdo, an old farmer, trembling with fear. May Nawawala, he whispered. Si Noel, young Taga Kabila. He went into the woods last night and never came back. A search party was formed. Paul joined them, of course, though part of him already feared what they would or wouldn't find. They searched all day, combing through dense foliage, calling Noel's name until their voices went hoarse. They found his slipper near the base of a mossy tree. No blood, no signs of struggle, just one torn slipper, and more of those gigantic prints in the mud, circling the spot like something had stalked him before he vanished. That night, Paul sat on the porch with Elmer, both of them silent. The wind was colder now. Even the insects were quiet. "I think it's time," Paul finally said, his voice low. "I'm going to find out what this thing is. I'm not running anymore." Elmer stared at him, hesitant. "You're serious?" "I'll take the camera. The good one. I'll set up camp near the waterfall, where I found the claw marks." Elmer sighed, then nodded. "Then I'm going with you." They packed the next day, flashlights, canned goods, a drone, and the camera. Paul left a note on the table for anyone who might come looking if they didn't return. And by sunset, they were deep in the forest. It was a strange kind of beauty out there. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden-red glow through the treetops. For a moment, it felt like peace, like the world had forgotten its shadows. But then, as darkness claimed the mountains, the forest changed. The air grew thick. The birds fell silent. The wind died completely. And then came the howl. It echoed through the trees. Not a wolf, not a dog, but something older, something primal. It was deep and full of fury, as if the forest itself had awakened. Paul grabbed his camera, hit record, and aimed toward the sound. Branches cracked in the distance. Then something moved. A huge silhouette stepped into view for just a breath, covered in black hair, towering, with glowing amber eyes staring directly into the lens. The camera shook in Paul's hands. A second later, it was gone, but the trees were still swaying. The ground was trembling, and Paul realized, with a chill down his spine, it wasn't alone. The forest was no longer just a place. It was alive, watching, breathing. After that brief glimpse of the towering creature with glowing eyes, Paul and Elmer didn't speak. They couldn't. Their mouths were dry, their hands cold, and their instincts screaming at them to run. But they didn't move. Not yet. The moment passed like a knife through silence. The trees calmed. The trembling ground settled. Whatever it was, it had vanished. But the fear remained, lingering like thick fog in their lungs. Back at their small tent, Elmer sat staring at the camera screen, repeatedly playing back the few seconds they had caught. "It's real," he whispered. "Paul, this isn't a prank. This isn't just a creature." Paul didn't answer right away. His mind had gone somewhere else, farther back, to when he was 8, hiding under his Lolo's wooden bed, shivering from fear while his grandfather chanted prayers in a language he didn't fully understand. That night, he remembered something knocking on their roof, slow, deliberate thuds, as if testing the strength of their home. Lolo had burned herbs and whispered to an old, carved shell he kept on a thread. "They're near again," he had said that night. "They've never forgotten." He didn't understand it then. But now, those memories were returning like pieces of a puzzle that had always been buried inside him. That night in the tent, while Elmer finally drifted into a light sleep, Paul sat outside by the dying fire. He held the old necklace his Lolo had left behind. A simple thing, really, just a small kabibi carved with strange markings. He had worn it since he was a boy, mostly out of respect. But tonight, it felt warm. Too warm. Suddenly, the fire flared, without warning, without wind. And from the shadows, near the trees, a figure stepped forward. At first, Paul thought it was just another hiker. But as the man came closer, his eyes adjusted, and he saw that this was no ordinary human. The figure was barefoot, his skin pale and glistening like wet stone. His hair flowed like seaweed, damp and long, and his eyes, completely black without whites, reflected the firelight like pools of ink. Paul stood quickly, grabbing a stick. "Who are you?" he asked, voice tight. The being raised a hand, calm, and slowly knelt near the fire. "You are the last blood," he said in a voice that sounded like waves breaking against rocks. "Your Lolo made a pact, and now the forest calls it due." Paul stared, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "I am Calloway," the being said, his voice echoing softly. "I come from the river. Once your ancestors saved my kin from fire. In return, we gave your bloodline a gift, protection through the mutia you wear. But the pact was broken, the curse forgotten." Paul's mind swirled. "Curse? What curse?" Calloway stood again, slowly. "You were never meant to face this alone. The creature you saw, he is only a scout. The real threat sleeps beneath these mountains. They are old, cursed spirits that wear flesh like clothing. Aswangs, yes, but older than what your people remember. They rise again for the bloodline that broke the seal." Paul's legs almost gave out. His grandfather, his family, had known all along? Calloway reached forward and touched the Kabibi necklace. Instantly, it glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. "This is your key. This is your burden. But it can also be your weapon." Paul whispered, "I'm not ready for this." "No one ever is," Calloway answered. "But you must choose. Run and let them hunt you. Or stand and become what your blood remembers." Before Paul could speak, Calloway stepped back into the shadows and was gone. The next morning, Elmer found Paul staring into the trees, his face pale and distant. "You okay?" he asked. Paul nodded slowly, then turned to his friend. "We have to go back to Lolo's house. There's something I need to find." They packed in silence, returning to Barangay Luentien before sunset. Paul's old home was quiet, almost abandoned, covered in vines and dust. Inside, everything was as he remembered it, simple, wooden, and filled with silence. He went straight to the old trunk beneath the bed. Inside were journals, his grandfather's notes, filled with strange drawings, chants, and warnings. If he dreams of fire, one entry read, "The mountain will wake." If the eyes return, the boy must find the Bantay. "What the hell is a Bantay?" Elmer muttered beside him. Paul kept flipping pages until one drawing caught his attention. A circle of stones, marked with the same symbols as his necklace. And beneath it, one phrase, "Where the blood was first spilled, power can be reborn." That night, the village dogs howled again, and Paul dreamt of fire, of a screaming forest, of black-winged creatures tearing the sky open, and of a boy standing alone on a mountaintop, holding a glowing shell against a storm of shadows. The next day, he went to the old albulario who lived near the river. Mang Isco, a wrinkled man who rarely spoke to anyone. Paul had seen him once as a child, when his grandfather brought him to be blessed after a high fever. When Mang Isco saw the necklace, his eyes widened. "You should not be wearing that unless you're ready," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "It's not just a mutia, it's a seal. Your Lolo was one of the last Bantay. And you were marked since birth." "Marked for what?" Paul asked. "To wake the seal, or to die trying." Mang Isco led them to a hidden clearing deep in the jungle. There, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 black stones, each with ancient carvings. Paul stood in the center while Mang Isco chanted, sprinkling salt and burned leaves into the air. As the final words left his mouth, the necklace flared again, and Paul screamed. Visions rushed into his mind. Memories not his own, warriors fighting shadow beasts, his Lolo sealing a black creature beneath the earth, and the flash of a woman's eyes just like Paul's, before she was consumed by fire. When it ended, Paul collapsed, gasping. "You are connected," Mang Isco said, "not just to the creature, but to the curse. You have a choice, Iho. Train, learn, or wait and be hunted." Paul looked up, trembling. "I'll fight," he said. But in the distance, the trees were already shaking again. Something was coming, and would not wait for him to be ready. The air in the forest had changed again. It was colder now, thicker. Every breeze felt like it carried a whisper, and the trees themselves seemed to lean closer with every step Paul took. It had only been a day since he stood in the circle of stones, since the mutia burned his chest and showed him visions that didn't belong to him. But something inside him had shifted. It was no longer just fear he felt. It was something heavier, like guilt. Back at his grandfather's old house, Paul couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, staring into the dark shapes outside, watching the outlines of trees sway gently in the wind. Elmer was asleep in the next room, and the only sound inside the house was the soft creaking of old wood. Paul clutched the kabibi around his neck, the warmth of it still pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat he didn't understand. His grandfather had kept so many secrets. All those years, the stories he told weren't just tales to scare him. They were warnings, clues. But no one ever told him the truth, not even when he was old enough to understand. Why? He opened the old journal again, running his fingers over the inked symbols and faded notes. The word Bante showed up again and again. Guardian, Watcher, Bloodline. Then he saw it, an entry buried in the back, pages yellowed and fragile. The boy's mother chose to turn away from the duty. She feared it, wanted to live among the people. She sealed her powers. But they found her, took her. I told them she died of illness. Elite. I had to. Paul's hands began to shake. His mother hadn't died the way they told him. She had been hunted, taken, by them. He slammed the journal shut and sat back, breathing hard, as if the air was suddenly too thick to swallow. His grandfather, his only parent figure, had lied to him his whole life, hidden the truth of who he was, what his family had been. All those nights he cried alone as a child, thinking his mother was just sick, all a lie. She had died fighting. Or worse, had never died at all. Paul didn't notice the movement outside until the dogs in the barangay began howling. A long, mournful sound that sent goosebumps racing up his arms. He stood quickly, grabbed the flashlight, and slipped outside without waking Elmer. The night was eerily silent. No crickets, no frogs, just wind and the distant howl of dogs that now sounded more like warning than grief. Then he saw it, down the trail, near the old kapok tree. Something was moving, not walking, crawling. But it wasn't small. Whatever it was, it had limbs too long for its body and skin that shimmered in the light like wet stone. Paul moved closer, careful not to step on the dry leaves. The thing stopped moving. Its head turned, too far too fast. Its eyes caught the light. Yellow, glowing. Paul stumbled back as the creature let out a low, guttural hiss. It rose to its full height, at least 7 feet, and stood like a man, but its arms dragged on the ground, and its mouth hung open unnaturally wide, rows of thin, sharp teeth shining in the dark. He ran, back to the house, through the path, crashing through bushes. He slammed the door shut behind him just as Elmer came running out of the room. What happened? Paul could barely speak. It's here. One of them. I saw it. Elmer grabbed the machete they kept near the window. Did it follow you? I don't know. They waited in silence. For hours, nothing came. By morning, Paul was exhausted. The fear still gripped him, but something else burned beneath it. Anger. Not just at the creatures, but at the truth. At his family. At the lies. He returned to Mangisco that day. The old albulario looked at him with heavy eyes, as if he already knew. She turned away from the path, didn't she? Paul asked. My mother. Mangisco notetslau. She wanted a quiet life, to raise you far from this curse. But you can't run from blood, Iho. You should have told me. It wasn't my place, Mangisco said. Your Lolo tried to protect you the only way he knew how. But it didn't work. Paul muttered. She's gone. He's gone. And now I'm left to clean it all up. You are not alone, Mang Isco said firmly. There are still others. The Lamong Bante, some still live, hiding in plain sight. You must find them. They will help prepare you. Paul was about to ask more when the wind outside suddenly shifted. Leaves blew in all directions, and a low rumble shook the earth. Mang Isco's face went pale. They're getting closer, he whispered. They've sensed the mutia. They know you're awakened now. What do? You run. Then you train. The old man handed him a folded cloth. Inside was a smooth stone, black as night, etched with the same markings found on Paul's necklace. This will mask your presence for a short time, but not forever. That night, Paul and Elmer left the village. They didn't tell anyone where they were going, only that Paul had family in the north, an excuse to cover the truth. They hiked through back roads and forest trails, guided only by Mang Isco's map and Paul's growing instinct. But the forest no longer felt like a place to escape. It felt alive, and the deeper they went, the more the shadows began to whisper. They started seeing signs, trees split down the middle with blackened bark. Small animals, drained of blood but left untouched. Strange symbols carved into the soil that glowed faintly at night. And once, while resting by a stream, Paul woke up to see a figure standing at the edge of the water. It was a woman, tall and pale, her hair floating around her as if she were underwater. She smiled gently, but her eyes were hollow. When he blinked, she was gone. The further they traveled, the more Paul's dreams worsened. Visions of his mother crying, of his Lolo burning something in the dark, of hands reaching for him from beneath the soil. And through it all, the mutia grew warmer, brighter, as if something inside it was waking up too. Paul didn't know if he was ready, didn't know if he wanted this at all, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. Not anymore. The wind blew stronger that night, cold and biting, even though it was supposed to be the dry season. Paul and Elmer had reached the edge of a forest no one dared enter. Gubbet ing limit, as the old maps called it. It was a place marked only in faded ink and half-told stories. The kind of place elders warned children about without ever saying why. They set up camp under a large bolete tree, its roots twisted like claws reaching through the earth. The moon barely showed through the thick clouds, and even the fire they built seemed to flicker weakly, as if the air itself resisted its light. Paul sat quietly, staring at the mutia that now glowed faintly, pulsing every few seconds. He could feel it. Something was coming. Or worse, something was already here. You ever think about just walking away from all this? Elmer asked beside him, his voice low, almost ashamed. Paul didn't answer right away. He had thought about it many times. When they left the village, when they saw their first dead animal, when he read his grandfather's lies in that journal. There were moments when he wanted to throw the mutia into the river and pretend he was just an ordinary man again. But those moments were always short. The truth had a way of following you, no matter how fast you ran. I did, Paul finally whispered. But now, we're too deep, and too many people have already suffered because someone else walked away. I won't add to that. Elmer nodded, but his eyes stayed on the shadows just outside the campfire's reach. You think we'll survive this? Paul didn't respond, because he honestly didn't know. The next morning, the forest felt different. The leaves had a strange sheen to them, and the birds didn't sing. The ground was littered with feathers, too many, all from crows. Paul bent down, touching one, and felt it crumble to ash between his fingers. What the hell is happening? Elmer muttered. It's growing, Paul said. Whatever they're doing, it's getting stronger. They moved deeper into the forest, following the map Mang Isco had given them. According to the notes, there was a sacred site hidden at the heart of the woods, Dien Inganino, an ancient ruin that once served as a temple for the Bantay. It was said to hold an echo of the power the ancestors once used to seal the Aswangs. But getting there was not simple. On the third day, they heard screaming. It came from far off, somewhere to the east. A man's voice, then two. Then nothing. They ran toward the sound and found a small hunting party from another village, bloodied and broken. 3 men dead, one still breathing but barely. He clutched Paul's arm and whispered, "They're waking it up. A black tree, it burns without fire." Then he died. Paul stood, jaw clenched. His grip tightened on the mutia, which now burned like hot stone against his chest. He didn't need to ask what they were doing. The Aswangs weren't hiding anymore. They were preparing. For what? He still didn't know. But it was big and close. That night, while Elmer slept, Paul walked alone into the trees. He stopped at a stream and looked at his reflection, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He didn't look like himself anymore. A soft voice came from behind. "You carry too much." Paul turned. It was the woman from the stream again, the spirit with long dark hair and pale skin. She wasn't smiling this time. "Who are you?" he asked. "I was once like you," she said, stepping closer. "A daughter of the Bantay. I failed. I didn't choose the path, and my village paid the price." Paul swallowed hard. "Why are you here?" "To warn you. They're almost ready. The Dark One, the one beneath the roots, he is stirring. If he rises, the curse won't just consume your bloodline, it will drown the land. Then help me stop it." "I can't." Her voice trembled. "But I can give you this." She reached into her chest, yes, into, and pulled out a small shard of light, placing it in Paul's hand. "This is a memory of the first seal, when a mountain burned and the sky cracked, when your ancestor held the line alone." The moment he touched it, Paul saw a vision, blinding, overwhelming. A man, shirtless and covered in tribal markings, standing at the mouth of a cave as thousands of shadows tried to pass him. He held up a glowing kabibi, screaming a name into the storm. Paul fell to his knees, gasping. When he looked up, the spirit was gone, and the mutia around his neck had changed. It now bore a second symbol, glowing faintly blue. By morning, Elmer noticed it immediately. "Your necklace, it's different." Paul told him what happened. Elmer listened in silence, then stood. "Then we need to move. That seal, whatever it means, it's a piece. We'll need more if we're going to stop this." They reached Dien Inganino the next night. It wasn't a temple anymore, just the remains of it. Stone pillars half buried in vines, carved steps eaten by moss, and in the center, a shallow pit filled with still black water. Paul stepped into the circle. The mutia pulsed again. The pit responded, its water glowing, swirling. Then a voice echoed around them, low and ancient. "Child of the broken line, bearer of sealed blood, do you stand against the darkness?" Paul felt his knees weaken, but he stood firm. "Yes." The voice grew deeper. "Then face what your blood has awakened." The earth shook. From the far edge of the ruin, something crawled out, long limbs, rotting skin, sharp wings like bone blades. Its face was half human, half animal, and it grinned with jagged teeth. Elmer pulled Paul back. "It's one of them," he shouted. They ran, barely dodging the beast's leap. It chased them through the trees, howling, snapping. Paul tripped, rolled, but Elmer pulled him up again. They reached a clearing, and the creature suddenly stopped, hissing at something behind them. Then Paul heard it, chanting, soft, rhythmic. From the trees emerged 3 figures, old men and women in robes of faded red. One of them lifted a staff carved with symbols Paul recognized. "You are not alone anymore," the lead said. "We are the last Bantay." The creature screamed and vanished into the night. Paul stood shaking, breath ragged. His hand clutched the mutia, which now bore a third symbol. The final battle was near, but with it came a flood of doubt. Could he carry the weight of a cursed bloodline? Could he lead what remained of a broken legacy? He didn't know, but he had no choice. The fire crackled softly as Paul sat in the middle of the ancient ruins, surrounded by the 3 surviving Bantay. Their faces were solemn, weathered by age and war, their eyes heavy with knowledge he didn't yet understand. The creature that chased them earlier was gone, for now, but its presence still lingered in the air like smoke that never cleared. The leader of the Bantay, a woman named Lola Orsa, approached Paul slowly. She held a scroll wrapped in faded red cloth and handed it to him. "This is the last written record of your lineage," she said. "Everything we have left. We were waiting for the one who bore the 3rd mark. And now you are here." Paul took it carefully, the weight of it heavier than he expected. He hadn't asked for any of this. He never wanted to be the center of ancient wars or bloodline prophecies. But it didn't matter anymore. Destiny didn't care about what he wanted. As he opened the scroll, he noticed something strange. The name written on the top wasn't his grandfather's. It was his mother's, not as a fallen protector, but as a traitor. His heart stopped for a moment. Lola Orsa must have seen the confusion on his face. She wasn't killed by the Aswangs, Paul. She left us and made a deal with the Dark One. Paul blinked, stunned. That's not true. She was taken. That's what the spirit said. That's what Lolo wrote in his journal. She wasn't taken, Orsa said quietly. She surrendered herself. Willingly. The words hit harder than any wound. Paul couldn't speak. He just stared at the scroll, at the mark next to his mother's name, burned in black ink. Beumling, she turned. That night, Paul couldn't sleep. Elmer sat beside him, trying to comfort him, but nothing helped. Betrayal had its own kind of sting, the kind that burned from the inside out. "Maybe they're wrong," Elmer said softly. "People make mistakes. Maybe your mom was trying to protect you in her own way." Paul didn't answer, because deep down, a part of him believed it, and another part didn't. That was the worst part, not knowing. But the forest didn't give time for grief. By dawn, something had changed again. Birds flew in circles, confused. A river nearby turned black, thick like oil. And from the northern sky, a low hum began, a vibration that made the ground shiver. Paul stood at the edge of the ruin, the mutian now glowing so bright it almost burned his chest. Lola Orsa joined him, her cane digging into the dirt with every step. "It has started," she said. "What has?" "The awakening." She pointed toward the horizon. A tall mountain peak, long dormant, was now emitting thin lines of smoke. "They are opening the final gate. The one sealed by your ancestor 200 years ago." Paul swallowed. "Then we stop them. Tonight." But Lola shook her head. "No, you must first retrieve the last piece of the seal. Without it, the gate won't close again. It lies in the place your mother once guarded." "Where is that?" Orsa hesitated. "In the heart of the Silabna Gubbet, a cursed forest. No Bantay has ever returned from there. The journey took 2 days. The forest was thicker here, darker. Even the sun seemed afraid to pass through the trees." Paul, Elmer, and 2 of the Bantay warriors walked carefully, avoiding traps and strange vines that moved when no wind was present. On the second night, Elmer suddenly froze. "Do you hear that?" Paul listened. A voice. Soft. Singing. A lullaby. He turned. Standing in the middle of the path was a woman. Long hair, glowing eyes, and a familiar face. Paul's breath caught in his throat. It was her. His mother. She didn't look like a monster. She didn't look evil. She looked peaceful. "Enoch," she whispered. "You've grown." He stepped forward, tears forming. "Manga." But the Bantay pulled him back. "That's not her," one hissed. "That's a trap." "No," Paul insisted. "It's her. I know it. Look again." Paul blinked, and her face began to change. The smile became too wide. Her eyes now hollow. Her skin cracked like dry bark, and from her mouth, Insects began to crawl. Paul stepped back in horror. The illusion dissolved, and what stood there now was a twisted creature wearing his mother's shape. It screamed, lunged, but Elmer swung his blade and slashed it across the chest. The creature hissed and vanished into the trees. Paul dropped to his knees. "She's gone," he said. "They're using her against me." The Bante placed a hand on his shoulder. "That means she was once truly one of them, and part of her still is." Paul stood. "Stronger now. Then I'll end this. For her. For everyone." By the third morning, they reached a stone clearing. In the center stood an altar of bones, and on it, an orb glowing dark green. "The final piece," the warrior whispered. As Paul stepped forward, the sky darkened unnaturally. Thunder rolled, and from behind the trees, a figure emerged. Tall, cloaked in shadows, wearing armor made from the bones of fallen Bante. Paul's heart dropped. The Dark One. But what made his blood run cold wasn't the enemy's face. It was the figure beside him. His mother, alive, eyes glowing with both pain and power. She didn't speak. She only looked at Paul and smiled. He reached for the orb, but the moment he touched it, the ground shattered beneath him. He fell into darkness. He landed hard on stone, alone. The cavern was vast, lit by strange floating lights. And across from him stood himself, but twisted, eyes black, skin pale, a version of him corrupted by fear, doubt, and anger. It smiled. "This is who you could become," it said. "You think you're strong, but you're not. You're just a scared boy, clinging to a broken name." Paul gritted his teeth. "I'm more than that. Prove it." The twisted version attacked. Their fight wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Paul was forced to relive every failure, every lie, every moment he wished he had walked away. He saw his mother turn, his grandfather lie, his own fear holding him back. But he fought through it, and when he struck the final blow, the illusion shattered. The orb now floated above him, waiting. He grabbed it, and the final mark appeared on the mutia. The full seal was complete. But as he rose to the surface once more, with the sky now blood-red and thunder echoing like war drums, he knew this was only the beginning, because now the Dark One had seen him, and his mother, once protector, now weapon, was coming. The sky was bleeding. Crimson clouds swirled above the forest as if the heavens themselves were mourning. Trees groaned with every gust of wind, and the ground trembled beneath Paul's feet. The mutia on his chest now glowed fiercely, etched with all 4 ancestral marks, pulsing like a living heart. Paul stood at the edge of the dark valley, Bunganga Inganino, the mouth of shadows, where the ancient gate lay. In front of him were ruins of a forgotten temple, now cracked wide open. Shadows danced around it like spirits drawn to death. Beside him stood Elmer, breathing heavily but ready. Behind them, the last Bante, Lola Orsa, and 2 warriors held their ground. At the center of the broken temple stood the Dark One, towering, wrapped in bone and ash, his body flickering between physical and spirit form. And beside him was Paul's mother. But she didn't look like the twisted illusion from before. No, this time it was truly her. Her eyes were hers, but filled with centuries of sorrow. "Mama," Paul whispered. She looked at him, tired, torn, a war behind her eyes. "You came farther than I expected." "Why?" Paul asked, his voice cracking. "Why did you leave us?" She stepped forward gently. "To save you." Paul's fist tightened. "Save me?" "You turned. I bargained with darkness to protect you from it," she said, trembling. "You're Lolo. He was going to raise you to fight this curse. I couldn't let it happen. I gave myself to the shadows so you could grow free. But the curse, it never let you go." Tears stung Paul's eyes. "You could have told me. I wanted to, but I was already lost by the time you could understand." The dark one growled, impatient. Enough, it spoke, its voice a chorus of agony. The child bears a seal. He must choose. Paul felt it. The pressure in the air, the ancient weight of his bloodline pushing against him like a mountain. The gate was opening. If he didn't act now, the Aswangs would rise, not just in this forest, but across the entire land. The curse would spread. His mother stepped back beside the Dark One. No, Paul said, voice rising. I won't let this continue. He reached for the mutia, now burning so hot it seared his skin. He raised it into the air. Light exploded from it, pure, white-blue light that pushed the shadows back. The ground shook violently. Cracks split across the stone, and the ancient gate, the mouth beneath the temple, began to seal. The Dark One screamed and lunged. The battle began. Paul dodged, barely, as the Dark One's claws tore through stone. Elmer and the Bante attacked from the sides, throwing blades laced with sacred oil. The creature roared, hurling back warriors with a sweep of his massive arms. Paul met his mother in the center. She drew her blade, an old, ceremonial dagger once used by the Bante. You must finish it, she whispered, tears falling. Even if it means killing me. I can't. You must. They clashed, blade against blade, magic against memory. She was fast, graceful, fighting like someone who had trained with both light and shadow. But Paul had something she didn't. Purpose. He disarmed her, knocking the dagger from her hand. She dropped to her knees. Behind him, Elmer screamed as the Dark One struck him down, sending him flying into the broken pillars. Paul turned, rage boiling in his chest. He faced the Dark One. You've carried this curse too long, the creature hissed. Join her, live, or die like the rest. Paul gripped the mutia, now glowing with such intensity it cracked down the middle. He looked at the gate, halfway sealed. The only way to finish it was to offer the last piece of the seal. His own life. He stepped forward. No, his mother shouted, crawling to him. You can't. Paul looked back at her, his heart shattering. You gave your soul to protect me. Now I'll give mine to protect everyone else. He raised the mutia and drove it into the earth. A shock wave burst from the ground. Light poured through every crack. The gate screamed as it closed. The Dark One howled, its form unraveling in the light. Paul fell to his knees, his strength fading. The earth shook one last time, and then silence. When the dust settled, the gate was sealed. The Dark One was gone, and Paul lay on the ground, unconscious. He woke to rain. Soft, cleansing rain. Elmer knelt beside him, bruised but alive. You're not dead, idiot, he grinned weakly. Paul tried to sit, but pain rushed through his body. The gate. Closed. Elmer nodded. You did it. Paul looked around. The forest had changed. The air was lighter. The darkness was gone. Lola Orsa limped toward him and knelt, placing her hand on his head. You were the last Bante, Paul. But maybe now you could be the last. He smiled faintly. Then he saw her, his mother, kneeling far from the group, watching him. But she was fading. She smiled, tears in her eyes. Thank you, Enoch. You saved us all. Then she vanished into the mist. Paul cried, not just for her, but for the generations before him, for the weight that had finally been lifted. Weeks passed. The forest healed. The animals returned. The Bante rebuilt a small shrine near the sealed gate to honor the bloodline that ended the curse. Paul stayed in the village for a while, helping repair what was broken. But one morning he packed a small bag, tied the old mutia, now cracked but still warm, around his neck, and walked toward the horizon. Where are you going? Elmer asked. To find the others, Paul said. The ones still hiding. The ones like me. And as he walked into the mist, the wind whispered softly through the trees. But unknown to him, far beneath the sealed gate, something stirred once more. A single black root twitched, and a faint whisper echoed in the stone. It is never truly over. It had been 3 months since the gate was sealed. The forest that once breathed fear now felt quiet, still cautious, still healing, but alive. The trees had begun to regrow where darkness once claimed them. Birds sang again. The wind, which used to carry whispers of curses, now carried only the sound of peace. Paul sat under the same bolete tree where he and Elmer had once camped, staring up at the branches as light filtered through the leaves. He no longer wore the mutia around his neck. It was buried at the heart of the forest, near the gate, surrounded by stone markers honoring those who fell. His Lolo, the lost Bante, his mother. He came here often, not because he missed the fight, but because he still felt them here, like echoes. Behind him, Elmer approached, carrying 2 cups of salabat. Still thinking, Paul smiled weakly. Always. They sat together in silence for a while. There wasn't much that needed to be said between them now. They had survived something few others would ever understand. So what happens now? Elmer finally asked. Paul looked toward the trees. Nothing and everything. The threat's gone for now, but we still have to watch, just like the old Bante did. And you're okay with that? Paul nodded slowly. It's not about what I want anymore. It's about what's right. Later that week, Paul returned to the village of Barangay-Luantien. The people there had begun rebuilding their lives. With the forest peaceful again, farmers returned to their fields. Children played near the river. The fear that once haunted their eyes had faded, but there were still stories. Some whispered that a mutia had saved the land. Others said a boy with the blood of warriors sealed the gate. Most didn't believe it, or pretended not to. But the elders knew. The trees knew. The river knew. One night, Lola Orsa invited Paul to the small Bante shrine they had rebuilt near the center of the barangay. It was simple, just stones, carved names, and a fire that never went out. She handed Paul a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was his grandfather's journal, now repaired and preserved. He would be proud, she said softly. Paul ran his fingers over the worn pages. He lied to protect me. But maybe I needed to know the truth earlier. Sometimes love hides what it fears most, she said. But you faced it anyway. As he opened the journal, he saw a page he hadn't noticed before. It was his mother's handwriting. If you're reading this, Anik, I hope you chose light. I couldn't save myself, but I believed, even then, that you would. That's why I left. Not because I gave up, but because I wanted you to have a chance to grow up without chains. I'm sorry, but I love you. Paul's eyes burned. He closed the book and pressed it to his chest. Thank you, Mama, he whispered. In the days that followed, Paul began writing. Not a journal of battle, or spells, or curses, but of stories, memories, names, truths that were nearly lost. With Elmer's help, he traveled to nearby villages, speaking with the elders, gathering the last oral histories of the Bante, of the seals, and of the forest's old ways. He wasn't trying to build an army. He was building remembrance. And with every page he wrote, he felt lighter. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the edge of the forest, Paul found a small child sitting alone by the riverbank. The boy was quiet, staring into the water. Paul sat beside him. Are you lost? He asked gently. The boy shook his head. I see them sometimes. See who? The shadows. But they're not scary anymore. They just watch. Paul smiled. Then they're probably watching over you. The boy looked at him, eyes wide. Are you the one from the stories? Paul didn't answer right away. He simply stood and handed the boy a small carved stone, a simple symbol of the Bante. Maybe, he said, but you're the one who gets to write the next part. Months turned into a year. Paul chose not to return to city life. The forest had become his home, and the people his family. He taught small groups about the ways of the Bante, not to prepare them for war, but to remind them of what was once almost forgotten. Lola Orsa passed quietly in her sleep that summer, her hand resting on the edge of the eternal flame in the shrine. They buried her with honor, and her name was carved beside the others. Elmer stayed by Paul's side, opening a small panulian for travelers and researchers who wanted to learn about the forest without disturbing its peace. Together, they guarded it, not like warriors anymore, but like gardeners, caretakers of memory. The forest remained calm, but Paul never stopped listening, because deep inside him, he knew the truth. Evil doesn't always come with noise and teeth. Sometimes it waits in silence. Sometimes it grows slowly like a root. But as long as someone remembers the light, the darkness can never fully win. One rainy morning, Paul stood again at the sight of the sealed gate. Grass had begun to grow over the stones. The mutia buried beneath still gave off a faint warmth, though no one else could feel it. He placed a single white camellia flower on the stone. "I'm not a hero," he said softly. "I'm just someone who chose not to run." Then he turned to leave. As he walked away, the wind picked up, rustling the trees gently. And for a brief moment, he heard her voice. "Thank you, Enoch." Paul smiled. The forest was watching. But now so was he. Wackus,